but hopefully that's okay with you. There are 4 members of the panel who will be working on it and who will read through the submissions and the transcripts as well. And if you could just introduce yourself for the record, please.
Mark Boliat, I'm Chair of Link Scheme.
Thank you. So as I said, we've received your submission. Thank you for that. That was very helpful. There's some, I think, useful information for us in that. I know it's from a UK perspective. I think the first question really is, could you tell us what your capacity is that you're talking to us and what Link is and what you do and that organisation does?
I'm chair of the Link board, and that's the capacity in which I'm at this meeting today. Link provides the mechanism by which every card works in every machine. So, for example, a Barclays card will work in a NatWest machine. That requires technology, and we run that technology, or rather we manage the technology. It's actually outsourced to a subsidiary of MasterCard. That's Link's primary function. And our success criterion is nothing happens. That is, the system works 100% of the time, which it does. We've developed a secondary function over the years of maintaining access to cash in the face of declining use of cash. So for many years, we've had a system that subsidizes cash dispensers that would otherwise not be viable. And there's several thousand machines now benefit from that subsidy. It's paid for by the banks. We don't have any money of our own. The money comes from the banks. More recently, we've developed a very successful scheme of community request and ATM. So if any community, and we don't define what a community is, it can be politicians, it can be business people, it can be one person. If they say to us, we've got a problem with access to cash, we look at it. We look at it, first of all, with a computer. And if we think prima facie, yeah, there's an issue, we send people physically to it, anywhere in the UK. And they will look at, is there a problem? They'll talk with local businesses and they will assess, yeah, there's a problem here. And this is where it can be solved. We then commission an ATM. And we've put in 100 over the last few years on that basis. And that's provided access to cash. It's improved access to cash. More recently, we have a role in assessing communities' access to banking services, where a community can say, even though we haven't lost a bank branch, will you look at the services we've got? We've got criteria agreed by the banks, and we'll assess, does this community need a service it doesn't have? We do the assessment. Another organisation called Cash Access UK does the implementation. So, sorry, that's a long answer, but that's what we do. But in doing that, we do a huge amount of research, and we've given you some of the benefit of that, and we have a lot of data.
Thank you. So can I maybe ask an example? So let's say there's a rural community somewhere in the UK that currently doesn't have a cash machine. They lobby for one, for want of a better word, and they're successful. Is it likely that, would the cash machine be free of charge?
Yes, oh, always. There'll be no question of charging. So we pay a company, and we can pay them £40,000 to put in a cash machine because it would not be viable. So what we're doing is subsidising it for a 5-year period.
And are there any fees associated with the withdrawal of cash?
No, never. No. There are machines that charge. A small proportion of the total. We disregard them completely in looking at access to cash. It's about free access.
Okay. Thank you. That's useful. And I suppose, is there any legislation, we'll come on to that maybe in more detail, that's part of our question plan, but around charging for access to machines?
There's no legislation. Cash machines cost money. So the fact that they're free, they're not free, somebody's paying for it. So all bank customers are paying for the cash dispensers. And the government could ban machines that charge. The effect of that is that those machines would be closed. They wouldn't become free.
Yeah, you see some corner shops, for example, that have a charge maybe £1.75,
Correct.
something like that.
So amongst other things, we require that charge to be upfront. It'll be on the screen, so people know they're doing it. We've done a fair bit of research in the past few years about who are the people who use these machines, because we're really concerned that it's the most vulnerable people who use them. And sometimes it's people don't care. they need £100 quick, they'll pay £1.75. There can be a free machine 50 yards away, and they'll still pay the £1.75.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So, in your, I think you talk in your submission that it's been identified that the number of ATMs in Jersey has fallen less than in the United Kingdom, and that the value of cash dispense has fallen more. Do you have any comment on why this may be the case?
You're right on the figures. We think there were 69 cash machines in Jersey. That's 15% fewer than in 2019, as against 26% in the UK. Cash withdrawn has fallen by 51% over that period. In the UK, a lot of the reduction has been where there's multiple machines. So you go into a railway station 5 years ago, you could find 20 machines. We had high streets with 30 cash dispensers. And what's happened is that 30 has come down to a few. Indeed, where I live, Northwood in London, we had, I think, 6. We now have 1. And that's fine as far as we're concerned.
Do you have any anecdotal evidence about cash being withdrawn directly from banks, people going in, either taking money out of their own accounts, cashing cheques?
I mean, when I was a student, that's how I got my cash. If you can find a bank branch, some people still do it, but it's a tiny proportion of the total.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, so if we can maybe ask about the situation of cash in Jersey in terms of So effectively what you're saying, the starting point, I suppose, in the UK is that there were a lot more cash machines for them to be able to reduce the number, whereas in Jersey, it's because it's so small, I suppose, it's a need basis.
Yeah, I'm not certain I draw huge significance in the figures. It could just be chance of what a bank might or might not be doing. You may suddenly find, a bank closing 4 that actually has no effect on the overall pattern. I'm not aware we've had a community request an ATM from Jersey, but if we do, we'd absolutely look at it.
And so I'm just looking at the map you provided, which was helpful. Is it correct that there were cash machines at Jersey Airport? Is that right? Do you know? I know there was talk a while back about I think they'd got rid of one at the arrivals hall, but I think there are some, but they're airside. Is that right?
I think there used to be in the departure hall, and you could get a UK notes. It's clearly the last thing you want if you're leaving Jersey was Jersey pound notes or £10 notes.
I'm pretty sure it's airside, but I'd have to check that. Okay, thank you for that. And I suppose just an additional question: Do you have any? Do you make any comparisons about what other countries are doing with cash machines?
I mean, part of what we do at Link is monitor what's going on around the world. We've actually had presentations recently from Sweden, which is the most developed country in terms of less use of cash, and from Australia. And we can do that electronically. They've been really useful because we actually want the board and the executives to be fully abreast of what's going on around the world. What can we learn from other countries? Sweden went a bit too quickly. And one of the issues we've been looking at, and I can come on to that later, is the reverse ATM. Been looking at what's happened in America when some states have required retailers to use cash, and they responded by a reverse ATM.
So tell us what that is.
Yeah, I had to ask that question myself. So a shopping centre, let's say in Jersey, you required every retailer to accept cash. So in America, what they do is have one machine where instead of putting a card in and getting cash out, you put the cash in and you get a card out. So you get a £20 card or a £50 card or whatever. And so the retailer doesn't have the expense of having to handle cash, but the consumer is fine. They've got a payment card. It's a payment card. It's not a bank account. It's got privacy. All of the issues why some people want cash.
Is it tied to that particular retailer, or can you spend it within the?
I think generally a shopping centre will do it, and in America they're all about malls. It's not like Jersey. Everywhere would take it.
Yeah. Okay. And you do allude to the £100 card, I think also, which that was issued by government, which was preloaded during COVID.
I think that's a very interesting thing for you to look at
Yeah.
and perhaps ask the Treasury. I'm not aware that people said, I need the cash, and I'm not aware that people didn't use it. And indeed, I think that card may have helped some people who were nervous about cards to begin using them. The other initiative that I thought was great is Community Savings, which has introduced a payment card for people who don't have a bank account. That is exactly the sort of initiative that I think can address the problem you're concerned with.
Preloaded card.
Preloaded.
Top it up. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Well, we can move on to that. So I think we're in this area already. So what of those islanders who will not, either through choice or need, adopt digital payment methods? Because I know your submission talks very much about engagement and inclusion. So,
I mean, bearing in mind our job is to provide access to cash, you might think that our objective is use of cash. It's not. We look beyond that. Our objective is that the overall objective is that people should have the financial services they need. Now, if people are using cash only at the moment, they are being denied access to many goods and services. You can't buy on Amazon using cash. And for Jersey, because inevitably you've got a limited range of retailers, because it's an island, that's important. I'll give you another example. If you go on Liberty Bus, you're paying cash, you're paying £2.70. You're using a card, it's £2.35, and you're using their card, it's £2. I think Max is nodding. I think those are the figures. So I think a worry we have, and we had a really good discussion at the board over dinner with a very key person in all of this. And he made the comment to us, we're really not helping disadvantaged people by keeping them using cash. Yeah. All we're doing is preserving their disadvantage. Of course, we need to help them on cash, but we also need to help them use other means so they're not denied access to goods and services.
Can I drill down on that? So I think there will certainly be there's all sorts of reasons that we understand people might use cash, and some of those will be classed as vulnerable in inverted commas. But there are people out there who simply just choose to use cash. They've got great wherewithal. They're intelligent. They've got cards. They sometimes pay with cards, but for all sorts of reasons, people like to pay with cash. What would you say to those people? And is the ultimate vision, I guess, is what I'm asking, that we have a cashless society, and about how we get to that point and how long that takes?
It's not for us to have a vision. That's for politicians like you, not for organisations like Link. We're very clear what we're doing at Link. Our mission is to preserve access to cash as long as it's needed. Yeah. But we want to use the experience we've gained from all of the work we've done on access to cash. And we've been running digital pilots as well. So I went with a colleague on the board to Pencoed in Wales, where they were running a scheme with elderly people, trying to get them to use iPads. I don't believe it was going to work. But it was worth doing. Why is it not working? Now, many people, elderly people who've never used an iPad, never used electronic, they get their children or grandchildren to do it. And I did that with my parents. But not everybody has got a child or a grandchild who can do that for them. And that's the group of people that it's really important to help.
Can I just ask a specific question about Liberty Bus, for example, or any company which might have a variation in its charge for the same product or service? Do you think that is justified?
That's a political matter, but I would say Liberty Bus is running its scheme under contract with the government. So that's a matter for the government. The motive for offering a discount for cash is that it saves money and it reduces the opportunity for theft. Probably not a great issue in Jersey, but it is in other places. So they want an incentive for people not to use cash. Yeah. And I know Jersey Electricity offers a discount, not a huge amount, if people are paperless. Very similar. Yeah.
I guess it's questionable whether it's a discount or whether it's a surcharge, depending which way you look at it. But
If you're a producer of a service, it's always called a discount, not a surcharge.
yeah. But would you? I know this isn't. I'm not asking you this in your capacity as Link chairman necessarily, but as a citizen of and a regular user of Jersey services, I suppose, like all of us. If it proliferated and that you had that there were lots of companies charging extra for your coffee if you pay in cash, or for your petrol if you pay in cash, what would that do to that vulnerable group you've identified who already use cash?
I think some work we did was coming back to machines that charge. Why do people use them? Who are they? Is there a bit of work that the banks can do? And several of the banks did this. Can we actually say to these people, by the way, we've observed that you are using machines to take out £20 and you're paying £1.75. Are you aware there's a machine 50 yards away? And the response from some people might be, oh, thank you, yeah, I'll do that in future. From others, it's, who do you think you are to tell me what I should be doing? People willingly pay large amounts for bottled water that's free out of a tap. The same water. So I think it's a difficult issue. The banks, I think, particularly during lockdown, spent quite a bit of time with individual customers to try to persuade them, looking at their behaviour to say, you could save money by doing this. But there's only so far I think you can go.
Okay. And in a moment I will pass over to my colleague Max, but the final question for this part, which we may have touched on already, what would you envisage is the path for digital inclusion? So, for example, those individuals who maybe don't have a bank account, or they've got limited access to the type of bank account, what actions could be taken in this regard to give them greater digital inclusion?
I think there's, first of all, an issue about opening bank accounts, which is not a Jersey issue. I observed in the last election that a political party couldn't open a bank account. Just not possible. And even I've been involved in setting up several charities, including more recently the Policy Centre. Opening a bank account was a struggle. It took us several months. We actually picked the board to be the people who could most easily open the bank account rather than the people who could actually run the organisation. That's an issue that you're not going to solve. For the people who either don't want a bank account, can't get a bank account, I don't think the solution longer term will work of forcing institutions to take cash. I think the payment card is the one that really needs exploring. So, I was pleased to see what Community Savings have announced. I think it hasn't happened yet, but it'd be really useful to learn more about that and for them to evaluate after a few months, how's it working? Yeah. What more can we do? So I don't know with this card, for example, whether it's got a strip that tells you how much there's left, or whether it's a £10 card and you suddenly discover, got nothing left. So, the Avanci card, as you know, you get a receipt, it tells you what's left. My golf club has a card that does that, but the card doesn't do it, but cards can do that. And I think the partnership that Digital Jersey's had with MasterCard can absolutely help to frame that. And I think that they've worked with Community Savings.
Okay. Thank you, that's helpful. I'll pass over to you, Max.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for coming in today. I just wanted to start off with the first question by asking you about the benefits of digitalised transactions and why that may be of benefit to both businesses and consumers.
Cost is the obvious one. We commissioned a few years ago a study on cash from Natalie Sini. The timing was immaculate in that it was just becoming an issue, and it was a really good report, so much so the government sort of claimed it was their report, which it wasn't. And they worked out that use of cash cost businesses £5 billion a year. And you add to that the cost to consumers, they reckon was another 5 billion. So that's 10 billion in total. Now, to give you an example about the cost of cash, a club to which I belong, a sports club, at half time, the bar was open for people to buy coffee or beer, and they accepted cash and cards. 1 week, suddenly it was card only. And I said to the person running it, who I happen to know, why? Last week, end of the match. I said, right, I'll take the cash to the bank. Where's the cash? You're all temporary staff. So they lost half the takings. The next week, card only. Did anybody bat an eyelid about it? No. So, there's a cost for using cash. There's a security issue for using cash. So there are cafes in St Helier that are card only. They have no cash machine.
So if I can interrupt, that in itself is a strong argument, certainly for government and for businesses, to want to go cashless completely.
I think what businesses find, they don't want to lose custom. So if 10 years ago a business had said card only, fine, they could lose 20% of their business. Yeah. They make that judgment.
But Amazon don't worry about losing business.
No, far from it. Now, I used to work in a pub 50-something years ago, Smugglers Inn at Wayne, and we would close at 11 o'clock and we would cash up. It could take at least 30 minutes, quite often 45, where you're counting the cash, you're measuring it against the till roll, there are discrepancies, you then have to identify why. When you've sorted that out, you then put the cash in bags, you float in the till. 11:45, you go home. 10 o'clock in the morning, the boss takes the cash to a bank. Takes him 40 minutes. The saving, obviously, is none of that. There's also, particularly for catering establishments that use temporary staff, is what's called wastage or staff theft. If you're working in a pub, it's very easy. You ring up one amount that's different from the actual amount and you walk away with the cash. So there's a cost. It's mainly, where you're on temporary staff. Most retailers just don't have that problem. So a business is making an assessment. We're going cashless. What's the benefit? How much are we going to save? Alternatively, and what's it going to cost? There are other new businesses starting that might say it's card only. I know recently I went into a shop close to where I live and asked for a newspaper and offered a card. And I prefer cash. Next time cash only. I said there won't be a next time. I'm not walking around with £2 in my pocket that I might want to use once a month. So for businesses, they make a judgment. And if they get it wrong, they will lose business. There's been many businesses in the past that did not take cards. So I've observed taxis, for example, in London. The taxi drivers resisted compulsory use of cards. And it was not unusual for the driver to say, machine's not working, Gov. And if you said, that's a pity because I don't have any cash. Oh, let me see if I can get the machine working. So if the taxi drivers, they all know now, you've got to accept a card because otherwise you're going to find customers won't pay. So there's a big change that's happening. And coming back to what we want to do at Link is make sure that vulnerable people are protected as far as possible. But it's not just up to us.
I thank you for that explanation. I just wanted to also touch on the government and the government stance, and again that will differ internationally. But when we're looking at, say, tax revenues, do you think going towards digitalisation we will see higher tax revenues due to the fact that cash might be transacted less?
Yes, I don't know to what extent it's an issue. In India, where they did a major reform, which they got wrong on banknotes, it was deliberately done to reduce tax wastage. A good example in the UK in COVID, self-employed businesses could claim the equivalent of what was furlough by producing accounts.
Okay.
This had an amazing effect on the alleged revenue of some self-employed business people. So clearly having everything running through the banking system reduces the use of the cash economy. So when you ask why people use cash, there are different groups of people using it for different reasons. In some cases, it's clearly informal economy.
Yep.
In other cases, it's, for the reasons we've talked about earlier, familiarity, not having a bank account and so on.
What about can I just ask about the costs of using cards? Because we're being told that there are obviously costs, and a lot of businesses decide where the costs suit them best. So I know, for example, as a personal user, SumUp charges, I think it's 1.69% per transaction. So every £100 you spend, you're losing £1.69.
Are the retailers using it, not the customer?
Yeah, that's right. So we've had submissions saying basically that percentage, let's call it £1.69 in this case, that goes out of the Jersey economy. That's going somewhere. And of course, I suppose the argument is that a business which has got high turnover but maybe lower profit margins is going to be losing a lot. Whereas the argument that we hear is that the cash stays low, £50 remains £50, not taking into account inflation, and that circulates within the economy. So I give you £50, you spend it at the golf club. That person then spends it in the market.
Jersey's not going to have its own regime for what the card companies can charge. If it tried it, it wouldn't have any card companies. Now, there is a big issue about the charges made by Visa and MasterCard. But that's not something that Jersey can actually deal with. The charges used to be such that it was just very uneconomic to take a card for £2. Now it's not uneconomic. The structure has changed. I don't have the details. I can happily try and get them. So, if you tried to offer a card for £2 5 years ago, not acceptable. Now it's automatic. So there's nothing you can do about that. The retailer is making a judgment that it is worth it for them to pay X%, whatever it is, for the benefit of having the card payment.
Yeah, thank you.
I also just wanted to touch on technological failures or malfunctions that you have maybe come across in your chairmanship of Link, and what impact that may have had for both businesses and consumers.
Absolutely. So each month we get a board report about, forgotten what it's called, but outages, and there's always some. They are generally tiny. When you hear of banks having big problems, they're very seldom with the cash dispensers. So the big problem that TSB had, you recall some years ago, the cash was fine. Cash was isolated. I've been chair of Link for 7 years. We have never had a problem. No. Individual banks have had the odd problem, but we've never had a problem. And we don't have a problem because we spend many, many millions of pounds a year to make sure we do not have a problem. So we actually have 2 separate machines that do the processing running what's called live. Both of those have got their own electricity supply.
Okay.
In the event of nuclear war, I believe our cash dispensers would still be operating. I doubt if that would be a high priority for anybody. So in terms of cash, that's fine. Now, we recently had the computer problem and people said, this proves the importance of cash. And I thought, hang on, I thought the problem was planes weren't flying and trains weren't moving. How does access to cash help? Now, if you take a scenario that I know has happened, let's say a supermarket's machines go down for whatever reason. What happens? The supermarket says cash only. Fine, you've got supermarket queues of the people around here with no cash. So what happens? Some of them rush outside, assuming they've got a card and they're not doing it on their phone, and raid the cash dispenser. The first 100 may get their cash out before the machine runs out. It has been known for supermarkets to shut the doors when that happens. So for individuals to have cash in case their card doesn't work, fine. But for the community as a whole, it doesn't work for long. No. It'll work for a short amount.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, all of this seems to be leading to the inevitable point where cash is phased out. And I think you're making a good case, if I may say so, for why wider society, if not government, should consider a cashless society, because it seems to be much more efficient. Lost revenue, businesses don't have to worry about theft. How would we get to that point if you were advising government? How would we get to that point?
I may say that's not Link's position at all.
No, I'm not. It's not. I'm not saying it's a good or bad, but
yeah.
That's not an unreasonable position. And I suspect it's probably inevitable that we will end up in a cashless society.
I think what you're finding is that besides shops going cashless, I'm aware when I've been in sporting events, I'm trying to think whether it may have been when I was at Lord's or somewhere else, the entire place is cashless. And they say that up front. I think even some of the festivals, it's the same. They say up front, this is cashless. Yeah. In a way, I'm not certain the government needs to do anything. If you look at the rate of reduction of cash, and this is the UK finance figures, 74% of payments were in cash in 2000, 14% in 2022. The forecast is 7% in 2032. And I'm sure you can ask your staff here, that mirrors, and indeed yourselves, what's happening.
If government doesn't need to do anything, which is again a valid position, what does it need to do, if anything, about the people who, on the one hand, either want to pay cash or don't have access to digital?
I think that's the key question, and you have to say, well, what's the answer? And one answer is force businesses to take cash, but as we've said, that imposes a heavy cost on them, and it doesn't work for Amazon. And EasyJet, for example, does not take cash.
Well, one submission, he won't mind us saying because it's a public submission, but we'll have digital jersey in shortly. I think he's minded to say similar to you, but that there are certain services which should be safeguarded. So if they're essential services, for example, governmental ones, that a choice should be given, and that maybe there should be an obligation for certain types of services or products to be safeguarded in the interim.
I think you have to look at cost. I'm aware of the particular case that happened in Jersey, and I'm aware there was a cost to dealing with it. And the question is was that a good use of that money? If the problem was with one person, and I've no idea whether it was a general problem, the solution could have been to give them a free pass or to have a tin under the counter. Was the solution to have an all singing, all dancing till with all of the costs that involves? So I think helping that vulnerable group, we think, is absolutely vital. And the question is how best to help them. And the payment card, given Jersey's experience with lockdown and what community savings are now doing, and Tony Moretto, I'm sure, will be helpful on this. Let's learn from that. Let's learn from what's happened in other jurisdictions. And I asked my expert on this to provide me with a briefing, hence the reverse ATM, which I hadn't heard of before, and what other jurisdictions are doing. So, one doesn't start with the answer of preserve access to cash. The answer is how can we best help that group of people? And we're certain that for many years to come, cash will remain important.
We've heard of an informal use of reverse ATMs in the sense that someone comes in to buy something, might be a coffee, person says, I've got no card, I've only got cash, and they say we don't accept cash. So the server will say, well, look, give me the cash and I'll just pay for it on my card. So that's effectively what's happening informally with an arrangement on an ad hoc basis. So.
I think I've seen that done in supermarkets where somebody is delaying an entire queue
can't do it on a mass scale, but I think it is happening.
Absolutely, and I think, businesses don't want to turn away customers. And if it's a customer, who genuinely just does not want to use a card, even if the business, if it's a cafe, is actually card only, I'm sure they'd say, look, we're card only, but, we understand. That's, I think, how a good business would operate. No business wants to lose customers. And that's why, businesses that have moved to cash only, they clearly have done the calculation. I know there's a Facebook group that have published a list of organisations that don't accept cash. It includes the Moorings Hotel. Now, I'm not certain many vulnerable people would go to the Moorings for dinner. And if there's an organisation which genuinely, is dealing with vulnerable people, and a little cafe, which you may know, opposite Sand Street car park, run by my nephew. He moved to card some years ago. Tells me 80% of transactions are now card. And it's the same people who are still using cash. And absolutely he will accept cash because he would lose them otherwise. Where there are other cafes that can rightly take the view, all of our customers are card.
Yeah, okay, so, sorry, can I just ask as well? Obviously, you'd look at, say, the UK and, you'd see that money be printed, for instance. Now, how is that going to change in the future in a more digitalised world where transactions are happening, say, over 90% digitally and there are less cash transactions?
Yeah, that's an interesting issue. Basically, the Bank of England and the Jersey government like cash. They like notes. Effectively, it is an interest-free loan to them. And that's why there's attention on central bank digital currency. My view is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And it's not so much from the consumer, it's the Bank of England. We don't want to lose control. No. So in Jersey banknotes, they're great for the government of Jersey because people go to the UK with these Jersey banknotes. That's a gift to the government of Jersey. It's a bit like pay cards now phased out for parking. The number of pay cards people in the UK had.
You do have to pay more though if you're paying digital, I think, don't you? If you're paying on your phone for the parking, there's a surcharge.
No.
I'm pretty sure there is.
I do it all the time. I'm not aware of any. Again, there's a charge, but the charge is to the parking company, not.
Unless it's changed, but I won't dispute that during the hearing.
I know there's a surcharge if you. So I use pay by phone, which works here. There's a surcharge if you want a text or an email confirmation or a receipt. But I think just to pay. Having done it where my car is parked at the moment at Luton Airport, no, I paid the fee.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, when we're speaking about transactions, and especially with the digitalisation of the modern world, would you probably be in preference of having a backup payment system where there's, say, cards being utilised instead of, say, cash moving forward?
Resilience is vital. We employ, I think, 70 staff at Link.
Okay.
We used to employ 10. We're still largely doing the same thing. Most of the staff are there to make sure nothing happens.
Okay.
That's the test for resilience. Now, there is resilience in the system. So the Bank of England, one of our 3 regulators, say to us, what happens if the Link system goes down? And answer number 1 is nothing. Nobody notices. No. All the cash machines still work because almost every cash machine also works through Visa and MasterCard.
Yeah.
So literally, if the Link system goes down, it's fine. If Visa goes down, in a way, it's fine. The cash dispenser bit, payment bit's different.
Okay.
So there's resilience already, and that there's 3 separate systems that make sure that if one fails, others don't.
Yeah.
But also, if the entire cash dispenser system went down. For most people, okay, I can't get cash today, I'll get it tomorrow. You will find some people who say, I was going to take out £100 and I was going to put it on a horse at 10,000 to 1. You have cost me £100,000. Please pay up. Fine, you get that. If, for example, CHAPS goes down and people can't pay for the house, or they don't get, with backs, they don't get their salary, that's critical.
Yep.
So there are different parts that need to be protected, and a huge amount of work is done to make sure the system is resilient and that there's multiple backups. In the same way, if an individual is really concerned not to have a problem, you have 2 cards with different companies and you have cash.
Yep.
That is sensible resilience for an individual.
Yeah. You obviously touched on the Swedish experience in your chairmanship of Link. Could you just elucidate the panel on how far the Swedish have gone in terms of the use of cash compared to the use of digital transactions?
Don't have the figures in front of me. They did it very quickly.
Okay.
But Sweden's got a much better system. Britain is backward.
Yeah.
Britain used to be at the forefront of payments. It's no longer. So, for example, if the 3 of us go out for dinner and we share the bill, then what happens is one person pays and the others fork out cash. In Sweden, you get out your machines and you do it like that between you. That system does not operate in Britain. To some extent, it operates through Revolut. So if you're all on Revolut, you can do person-to-person payment. India has person-to-person payment. Britain doesn't. So you've got initiatives like that are happening. So Sweden has the one system called Swish. Yeah. Britain does not have that one system.
No.
So I think in Sweden it just went too far too quickly. They didn't have the system that we have of maintaining a lot of ATMs that otherwise would close down because they're not viable.
Yeah.
So we provide subsidies to over 3,000, and we've put in, said 100 new machines, and the subsidies can be as high as £2.50.
Okay.
But you're protecting an area that needs access to cash. But also, one of the other initiatives we've had recently is cash from the till.
Yep.
So until recently, you could only get cash from the till with a payment. We did a lot of work to provide for a system you can get cash from the till without a payment. That's run by PayPoint, and there are other initiatives along that line. So retailers themselves have a role in providing cash. And when I think it was in Ireland where the banks had a strike for months, the pubs finished up as running the bank. Yeah. So a point I think you made earlier, Chair, about people doing it individually. People find ways to get around problems. But what we're trying to do at Link is make sure there aren't any problems, to make sure that reduction in the use of cash is managed. It's not done in a way that hurts the most vulnerable.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just ask as well? Do you believe there is a need for governments globally to bring forward legislation for the use of cash, but also for transactions as well?
That's a matter for individual governments. I think the European Union is looking at a directive about cash acceptance. I'm not aware of any suggestions in Britain. We do have the new Financial Services and Markets Act, where the banks have an obligation to provide access to cash, which we're playing a major role in.
Yeah.
But government always needs to think carefully before intervening. What is the evil we are trying to prevent? Is legislation the best way to do it, or are there other ways of achieving the same objective?
Yep. No, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just come back to the parking. You're correct. There's no extra charge for parking charging on your phone. It may be that I remember it when it first came in that there was, but there is a charge for text messages. You're right.
Yes.
Thank you. You've talked about what the Central European Bank is doing. Do you think there's a philosophical difference in the way that Britain looks at cash and Europeans look at cash?
Yeah, there's big differences between countries. Germany, for example, is still cash in a much bigger way than Britain. There can be different reasons for that. They may be cultural, it may be the way the banking system is operated. So it's very difficult to apply the same rules to every.
Do we know what North America does, US and Canada?
The American states, the 50 states, have got their individual laws. So a number of states have passed laws. Populist thing, every institution is required to accept cash, but you can only apply that to the bricks and mortar ones. And that's where, as I've said, the response has been the reverse ATM.
Okay, that's useful, thank you. Do you have any comments that you wish to share on bank charges for digital or cash payment handling, if you've not done it already? I know we've touched on it. So I'll give you an example. This may be slightly of an ambiguous statement, but some people who've written to the panel have expressed concerns about banks gaining too much power over individuals. And I suppose what they might be saying is that, and it's a comment that the minister in fact made during a state's debate, was that he believes that I should be able to transact with you without a third party getting involved, and that's why cash is useful. So do you have any sympathy for those kind of arguments?
Again, that's not a matter for Link. Banks are, on the whole, very strict about use of data. And I'll give you an example, and I'm trying to remember it correctly. Banks were very concerned about people using a method of borrowing that was very expensive to them when they could have an overdraft at a fraction of the cost. So some of the banks started saying to their customers, look, you're borrowing 25%, you can have an overdraft at 10, and they got clobbered for misuse of data, not least from the institutions that were charging 25%. Yes, if people are bothered about the banks having access to data, and the banks do have access to a huge amount of data, payment cards, if people want privacy, payment cards are a way of overcoming that. And one of the uses of cash undoubtedly has been that people want privacy, in some cases for good reasons, in other cases for less good reasons.
Yeah, thank you. And do you think that bank charges will continue to go up if people use cash?
It's important that people talk about free banking services. Banking is not free. You've got bank branches here. They cost money. They've got staff. They cost money. So the issue isn't should the banks charge. The issue is who is paying. And interestingly, which every year castigates banks for closing branches. And you look at their best buys for banking services, and amazingly, they're banks without branches. First Direct, Monzo in particular. So companies like Revolut, Monzo, are taking business from the banks. None of them have branches. And the banks with the branches have got a heavy cost that they have to meet. So, while it's tempting to say any particular service should be free, that's not the question. The question is who's paying for it.
Okay, but free at the point of use, I suppose, is the argument in cross subsidies. But banks have lots of ways of making money, I suppose.
Yeah, but there are cross subsidies. But the worry about any cross subsidy, not just banks, the beneficiaries are the intelligent, sophisticated consumers. So, for example, at present, people who've left their savings in a bank account getting 0.1% interest are not the most sophisticated customers. The sophisticated ones are getting 4%, putting their money with Marcus or an equivalent. So we need always to think carefully about cross-subsidy. Who is subsidising who?
Great. I think we've covered a lot of the questions just organically by the way the conversation's gone. But I've got a final question here. Certainly, we'll move on to any other business, so to speak. One area that hasn't often been talked about, because we talk about fraud with regard to cash, but is fraud through digital payments. Have you got any concern about or any thoughts about the security of digital payments and online fraud, and again, people maybe being vulnerable to that?
There's concern about that. A lot of the concern is misplaced. Let me go back some years. You may recall phantom ATM withdrawals that people allege never happened. You don't hear about that anymore. So the banks would typically say to somebody who said, £100 gone from my account, could anybody else have used your card? You might like to think very carefully because we have video. And that has ceased to be an issue. So there's security if you're using cash. If you lose it, I mentioned the club I belong to that lost an entire day's takings on theft. It can be loss, it can be theft. There is far too much crime involving fraud. I've had, and my wife has had, our cards cloned and withdrawals from the accounts. The banks reimburse immediately because they know there's a problem. They're concerned about people conspiring, and that will be a problem with what the PSR is introducing of a £415,000 maximum compensation, and the banks are worried that two people conspire. That person defrauded me, you share the money. But on the whole, digital is very well protected. You have horror stories, but you ask people, have you actually suffered from any of this? So you do have the card cloning problem. Indeed, I recently had something quite similar. In this case, it was a new iPhone was delivered to me. I hadn't ordered an iPhone. So somebody had deliberately cloned my address, and I'm not quite sure how it was going to work, and we sorted it. And clearly the company concerned had this problem. They dealt with it very efficiently. So the banks have got systems in place. One of the problems with the payment system in Britain generally is that it's old and it's not very good at preventing fraud. Other countries have got better systems that can help prevent fraud. So fraud is a massive problem, various types of fraud, and a lot of work is being done to prevent that. As far as we're concerned at Link, there really aren't any issues, but we're not the place where you'll get the problems.
Yeah. Have you got any questions? No. I've got one more, and it's just that we've touched on it, and is that we've looked at different models. We looked at Sweden and what maybe other Central European countries are doing. Is there any country which you think is an exemplar of how we might want to manage the transition to a less cash society?
If you want to look at a country where digital has had the most benefit, it's undoubtedly India. But it's not a good comparator for all sorts of reasons, whereas I think Sweden is. We looked at Sweden and Australia, not so much because they're good. We wanted to learn from them, what went well, what didn't go well, what thing would you advise us not to do to avoid the same mistake. So when my board meets, we have about 8 face-to-face meetings a year. Now we always have a guest at dinner the night before or at lunch, giving us a wider perspective. I've mentioned we've already had video presentations from Australia and Sweden. We've had guests from bits of the financial services industry wanting to learn from them, and they also want to learn from us. So, I couldn't pick on another country. People do look at Sweden. It's well documented. The person who gave the presentation to us is a professional. He should be a politician. No, but he's very good. He's very good at explaining what they've done in a way that people in another country can understand. And if you wanted a session with him, we can quite happily give you the details, but we thought he was very good indeed.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for us or any additional comments?
I've got a comment, and I did send you an email. You're doing a survey. Most people are not remotely interested in this issue. It's a subject that's going to interest 5–10% of the population who will respond to your survey, as I have done. It's not representative. And so it's fine. You can use the results and say, of the people who responded. But that's not the way it tends to happen in Jersey. It is 80% of the population believe X. So I've said to you, if you would like, Link is prepared to do a survey that would use some of our questions that we've used in the UK and some of your questions to do it in Jersey using a professional firm that would give you data that, first of all, would give you a better comparison with the UK about the issues and give you something to complement what your own survey would do. So we've made that offer. It partly depends on the cost, but we're willing to look at it.
Okay. Thanks again for reiterating that. We appreciate that offer. We'll discuss that subsequently. We're also we are aware that it's a self-selecting survey, so a lot of these scrutiny reviews will be based on people who want to make submissions will do so. And what I would say is that we've certainly got more submissions than your average scrutiny review would expect to get, but we're mindful of the fact it's not 100% scientific, I think is a euphemistic way to put it.
Well, as you know, I've got an interest in public policy and Jersey more generally, and I'm afraid I have seen surveys done without asking for demographic information, which I think you did. Because you need to know who your responses from. Are they from young? Are they from the elderly? Are they from St Mary or St Helier? And as long as it's presented as this is self-selecting, that's fine. But sometimes the media may have a different interpretation.
No, we'll certainly make sure we're clear about the way we present it, and then I know we can rely on the media, certainly the one present, to be responsible as well when reporting it. So.
But do have a look at the offer we've made. We would happily work with you on the questions, but I think it would give you some additional information.
Thank you. Thank you. So finally, Sir Mark, thank you for coming in. We appreciate your time and your submission as well. And we'll be in touch, I'm sure, about your email as well.
Thank you very much. And any further information you need, Link, we've got staff who specialise in this. We're very happy to help. Indeed, I think Jersey could be not quite an exemplar, but I think what you could do on payment cards with the experience of the £100 card and community savings, we would be interested in Link, learning from that. So, you've got Tony Moretta coming. I think it's a really good initiative, and we'd be keen to learn